Okay, the camera's operating, and
Oh, wait till I put my drops in my eyes before I forget. It's 8 o'clock when I...
well, the kitchen says, you know, it's before I shaved, and I've been out in the yard looking around, and so we're not really pretty, as we're going to be later when we go to the temple. But who'd you say made these for you?
Lois, man.
Those are gorgeous. They're silk flowers, eh?
Uh-huh.
Look like something they just picked right off your
Yeah,
tree.
she gave them to me for Mother's Day. She and the lady made them. This lady that does them, Loisann helped her, and they got it made for my Mother's Day. But see, that'll be pretty forever. It's a routine you go through every day.
Oh, yeah.
You have to be on the... That cost me $58.57 a month.
Whoa.
Eye drops.
Just for eye drops. Visine's cheaper than that. I can get you some Visine.
Well, I
$3.
could do good. This is a prescription.
Well, how's your health?
Real good, I hope.
How old
I
are
feel
you now?
fine. Huh?
You just had a birthday. How old are you?
86.
86. She gets around, looks like somebody half her age. Going to temple today with the ward. I'm going with them. Well, tell us about the house and what happened here in the last little while. You were off on a trip, and
Well, what I did is I went to Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia, when Margaret's John was married. And then we returned, and a couple of weeks later we went back to Salt Lake because her daughter Jenny was getting married. So while I was gone to Salt Lake, Roland and Paula had been here from Minnesota. We had been house cleaning. So while I was gone, I was gone from Thursday till Sunday. When I got back Sunday, well, over the weekend, Roland and Paula's children had come up from Salt Lake, and they had completely house cleaned my house, windows and curtains, and it completely house cleaned it. And not only that, but they had all my closets.
we've taken pictures of the closets, so they've seen them.
So they did that, and then they were here for another week. Well, for a few days. They were here for a long holiday weekend, and over Memorial Day, and then they had to leave. So the house looks lovely. They've really got it nice and clean, and then we went out to the cemetery and did these kind of things that need to be done, and a little bit of yard work, and then they went home, and since then I've been here, and Daniel arrived last night. We've been kind of busy since he got here.
We went out to eat at A&W Root Beer Place. We had fish and chips. It's pretty good, plus a root beer. You always got to have a root beer float in the big frosty mug. We got to take a picture of that place before we leave, so that it is on the same video. Now tell us about the house and when you moved in. And
Well, the house was built between 1905 and 1907, and it was built by
Wisner?
No, Wisner bought it from him. What?
Oh.
What was his name?
He was original farm owner of Payette, right?
Oh,
Payette
yeah.
was a big farm.
He just owned half where the post office and everything was. And then George Wisner bought it from him, and then in '54 we bought it from George Wisner. And so we're the third owners to the home. And his stipulation was we not make it into apartments in his lifetime. But with the size family we had no intentions of making apartments out of it. I don't want to be a landlady. No way. Well, anyway, we haven't done a lot to the place, only paint and the things that the person does, but we haven't done any major remodeling. It's just like it was when it was built.
Yeah.
We have 10 rooms and 2 baths. And
There's also a basement down there, which
yeah,
is a fruit room and
we have a
furnace.
fruit room and a furnace room, which is in the basement.
And a third floor where Janice was going to keep a horse. Tell us about that.
Well, when Janice was 3 years old, she wanted a horse. She's always wanted a horse, but she wanted to have a horse. And I said, well, honey, we just can't have a horse because we're right in the city and there's no place to keep it. And she says, well, we could keep it on the 3rd floor. There's nobody up there. And of course, I really had to convince her that horses didn't go to the 3rd floor. But eventually, she did get her horses, and she and her husband now have horses and quite a place down there in Pleasant Grove,
yeah.
and so she does have her horses. But most of the time, we just lived here, and we moved in here with 8 children, and Daniel he came home from Utah from college, and then he went on his mission that he came home. When did you go on your mission in?
New Zealand in 55.
In
Fall of
55.
55.
And we moved here in June of 54. And so he came home, and that's the first time he'd seen this home. And when it has a nice swing on the front porch. And when we returned from church that day, Daniel was sitting in the swing, and he looked up and he said, Senator, who lives here?
I was pretty impressed.
Yeah, it is a lovely place. We have a nice, beautiful yard and lots of flowers.
Because we come from Burns, where we had a little place and a little property and stuff, but it wasn't a mansion like this. Tell us about the courtship, how you met Dad, and then the move to Burns. What in the world ever got you out there?
Well, I was from Payson, and I came to Salt Lake to go to business college. And after I graduated in 1929, I went to business college, and I came home at Thanksgiving time. And my parents lived just across the street from a big, beautiful, really nice dance hall. Well, my younger sister, Katherine, wanted to go to dance that night. It was Thanksgiving, and so we did. We just walked across the street and went to the dance, and Edith and her boyfriend were there, so we went and walked across the street with them, and this group of men came in, and they were from Nephi. Ralph knew the men, but Roland Davidson was with them, and he had been down to Nephi for 3 months. I don't know what he was down to Nephi for, but he was working for the land office, and so I guess he was down there learning something. But that's where I met him, was at this dance, and when he asked me if he could take me home, and so I told him yes, and he was surprised when we just walked across the street. And I said good night and opened the door and went in. So he had to go back across the street and kind of wait for the other guys that were taking some girlfriends home too. And so the next day then, I left to go back to Salt Lake because I had to be back to school. And he didn't believe that that's where I lived. And he thought I probably had a relative there, and just went in and out the back door and went on home. So the next day, these fellows, they came up to Payson again from Nephi. And he asked somebody over in town where the Fillmores lived. And they said that she lives right over there across the street from the dance hall. She lives at 90 South First West. And that was where I walked in the door and went to bed. So anyway, it was the following Friday when we were getting ready to go to assembly at the business college, and somebody came out and tapped me on the shoulder and said, well, hello, Payson. And but anyway, we started going together after that, and 2 years to the day that we met, we got married in Salt Lake Temple. And we lived there in Salt Lake we had our 5th wedding anniversary in Burns, Oregon. In June of 54, he was transferred out there with the grazing service, and he was transferred to Burns, Oregon, so we had to be there for August the 1st. So he drove a government car from Salt Lake to Burns, and that's a long ways, and at that time
it was gravel road, right?
It was all gravel roads, and we had 3 little children, and we went to Burns, arrived on a Sunday night. He had to be to work the next morning. So we didn't have any place to stay, and they wouldn't let us stay in the hotel because we had children. Now, we could have had a dog or something, but we couldn't have
You
any
can't have
children.
kids. What was the name of that hotel? Arrowhead or something?
I don't even remember.
It's across the street from the Tonawama Hall, right?
Yeah, there was, but anyway, there was a gentleman in the hotel, and he said, well, I have some little cabins, he said, out here west of town. He said, I'll put you up. And I said, well, he has to go be to work in the morning. So he took us out, and it was just a little house that had a kitchen and a bath and a nice big front room, and just a real little small place. So we stayed there for a week, and in the meantime, during that week, then we were able to purchase this little place that had 2 big barns and 3 little houses and on 2 acres of ground. So that's where we purchased it, and we moved there then, where we lived.
What did it cost?
It cost us $1,500
For 2 acres,
2 acres,
2 barns,
and 2
3
barns.
houses?
You remember how
No,
big
yeah.
they were. And so there was a family living in the little front house, as we called it. So they remained there for 2 or 3 years.
And they paid rent, right?
Oh, yes, and what was his name?
I can remember a
In the
guy who
barn.
lived in the cabin
Yeah, he
who
lived
was a
in,
barber, and I remember they got a new car while they lived in one of our houses.
well, he lived in the little barn. He lived in the little house, and then,
The big guy lived in a barn.
yeah, but I
Everybody
don't
paid
remember
rent.
his
I'm surprised we weren't rich.
Oh, yeah, that day and age would have been rich. But anyway, we remained there then. We lived there for...
The war was raging while we lived there, I remember that.
Yeah. We moved there in '36, in August the 1st of '36, and we moved over here in '54.
In between there, we lived in the Joe Fuller place and the Lemon House.
Yeah, well, we moved up to Joe Fuller's place.
Remember what year that was? Was it after the war?
No, it was when Jim was born. Jim was born just before we moved up there,
What year was that?
45.
So the war hadn't quite ended, but almost.
Yeah, and then we lived there, and then he
What month is Jim?
Jim was born in February, and we moved up
In
there.
March.
Jim was just a baby in arms, you know,
Right.
when we moved up there. And then
So I was 10 when we moved up there, almost.
and then we lived there
A couple of years
a couple
anyway.
of years, and then Joe had put the place up for sale, and we couldn't afford to buy it, so we bought the Lemon home, which was just through his field. It was a 10-acre place, was the Fuller place.
Do you remember the address of the Lemon home? Joe Fuller's place was on Riverside Drive, I remember that.
Yeah, and this was just,
Across through the field, there's now a school there, but at that time it was open field.
yeah, he had 10 acres at,
He had horses, we rode his horses. It's one of the reasons I never wanted a horse, those things.
I
Houses
was
like
never
that.
fond of horses. Of course, we didn't have any, except my father was a sheep herder, and when he was working in our area, he always had horses and his sheep dogs and things, and we'd go out to his camp and visit with him when we were little kids, but we never had any horses.
But he wasn't home that much, he was out.
Dad
doing
wasn't home at all. I don't remember my father being home at all until I was 17, and he was home for Christmas.
I remember sitting on the front porch
With
of
that
your
old
house,
rocking chair.
and him telling us stories, and I don't remember the stories, but they were funny, and we were laughing and hooting.
Yeah, he was quite a guy. But anyway, after we moved over, then we went to April conference in April of '54. Janice was our youngest. She was our 12th, and she was just a baby. And we took Dorothy with us. Dorothy was a teenager. We took her with us, and we went to April conference because we needed to be down there, because I was Relief Society president, and Roland was branch president there in Burns. And as we came through Payette, my sister lived here, Katherine Cole, and George Chadwick told us he had a home he'd like to show us. And so we came and he showed us this house, but it belonged to George Wisner, but then George Chadwick was a realtor, so he showed us the house.
And George obviously is a member of the church, so.
And so that's what I said. George Wisner told us that he would sell it to us for $10,000. And if we wouldn't make apartments out of it. And so
So how much did you have to have down?
we paid him $1,000 down.
1,000 down, and how much a month?
Whatever we had, we didn't pay very much. I don't even remember, but
$90 or so?
possibly so. I could probably check it out because I think we got every receipt.
Oh, there's
we
records, everything Dad ever bought, he kept a copy. It's upstairs.
And but anyway,
I was looking at one of his travel logs, sitting up, it was 1974, and where he was going and what he was doing and how much he paid for gas, and he'd fill up for
Oh.
$2.73.
yeah, fill his car up.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and he traveled like I did. I don't know if it's in the blood or what, but he was always, you know, it's always
always on the
insurance.
go. Always on the
To
go.
Utah or Burns or
And,
wherever.
But we've enjoyed living here.
So this is your actual, what, fifth address?
Well, huh?
How many moves did you make?
Well, we lived in up at
Fox,
Fox's home. We had an apartment upstairs in the home they had,
that's where Lorna was born.
and then we moved over on Warnock Avenue.
You bought that little house.
We bought a little house there, and we lived there
What's its
until
address? Is it still there?
615
Warnock.
Warnock Avenue, Warnock, and we lived there till Daniel was a year old, and that's when we had Lorna Jane, and then we had Katherine there on
Tell us
Warnock.
about Catherine's birth.
Well, Katherine was born the same day that the
Dion quintuplets.
the Dion quintuplets were born. But also that morning, we had an earthquake that morning. At least I didn't realize it, but Roland was, my husband was not home at the time, and it was it was in the evening, and the wind was blowing and everything, and I had a little fire on because it was March, and I had a little fire on in my little stove, and the stovepipe fell down. But Roland came home, and so I was standing there holding up the stovepipe, and he and I was also expecting Katherine. So anyway,
Any minute, right?
he was home, so he phoned, and his mother and them came up, and he called the doctor, and so when the doctor arrived, well, of course I was ready to deliver my baby, and I delivered another little girl, and we named her Katherine. But after the baby was born and everything, the nurse said, "Well, now maybe I better wash you up," and I had a little set, I guess, all over me
From the
from where I'd
stovepipe.
been holding up the stovepipe. They didn't have time to clean me up that much, and I just bathed and everything before that. But anyway, Katherine was born about 20 minutes after 1 in the morning, and of course in those days the doctors came to the home, but we had this little earthquake in the morning. We were having, Roland and his mother and Lorna were having breakfast, and it sounded just like a river of water was running in under the house, and the wind was blowing, the trees were swaying, and Roland's mother said, "Well, we're having an earthquake." So he grabbed Lorna Jane, and she picked up Katherine, and they started outside. And then when they got to the doorway, he says, "What are we going to do with her?" and I was laying there in the bed, and she says, well, if it doesn't stop, we'll have to come back. But they didn't go outdoors, they stayed in the doorway there. And, but it was about 3 o'clock when my nurse came to see me the next morning after the baby had been born, and it was just about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I had been taking a nap. And she said the reason she was so late getting there, that so many of the mothers had panicked when we,
Right.
well, there was nothing I could do about it, so I stayed in bed and took a nap.
Watched the chandelier swing or whatever.
Oh yeah, the chandelier and everything was just swaying in the house, but it was quite an experience for her to be born when it was a little earthquake, and also with the quintuplets having been born in Canada.
Now, what was going on when I was born?
Well, Daniel was born on the 21st of June. The following, well, Katherine was 15 months old when he was born, and she was born in March, and the following year he was born in June, and it was his mother, Grandma Davidson's wedding anniversary, and he was born on the 21st of June, but his dad had a paper out, and so that morning he went out to have the paper out, and he didn't get back very early. It was a Monday morning.
So he had two jobs, paper out and land office.
Worked at the land office, and so when he got home his paper out, he was kind of late, and Willard, his brother Willard, had gone down to Payson and brought my mother up, and my mother came up and stayed with me then for about 3 weeks, but Roland was late getting home from his paper out, and I said, well, what made you so late today? And he said, well, I had to tell everybody I had a son. So evidently...
So I was born early in the morning.
Yeah, he was born early in the morning also. And then Daniel was just a year old in June when we went to Burns, Oregon in August. But,
Okay, tell each one of the kids' birth and what was going on at the time.
But
after me was...
we went to Burns, and Daniel was 2 years, he was 2 years old in June, and of course he was just learning to walk when we went to Burns. He was just learning to walk, and so after we moved into the little home we purchased then, why, in September of Daniel was born in 35, and in
37.
September of 37, Roland, our next son, was born.
And on that same day, we didn't know it, but over here in Payette, Donna Larson was born, September 10th, 1937.
Well, she was born the same day as Lorna. Lorna was born September the 10th.
Oh.
And Roland was,
The
was
second.
born the 2nd, but
Right.
Donna was born, that's Daniel's wife, was born the same day. But
So what was happening as Roly was born? Anything unusual? No earthquakes or anything?
no.
But he was born in the little brown house.
Yeah, he was.
The doctor came to the house.
He was. Yeah, the doctor
Dr.
came.
Holman?
Dr. Holman came to the house, and then.
What about Rowena?
Rowena was born on the 28th of December in 38, and it was a cold day, but the doctor still came to the house.
Same doctor,
Same
Dr. Holman.
doctor. And
Anything unusual about hers? No earthquakes? No.
no, nothing. No, just just a cold night.
Anything
She was born in
unusual about the
middle of
babies? Roly, was he as...
well, Roly, at the time of his birth, he was kind of cord bound around his neck and under his arm, but nothing that, I mean, he wasn't choking with it or anything, but...
Was he an unusual child in any way? Did he have a little hammer always building stuff like he does now?
Oh, Roland, Daniel always took real good care of everything he had. I think Daniel might even have some of his toys now that he got when he was a kid, but Roland had to take him to pieces to see what they was made of. By New Year's, Roland had everything all taken to pieces, and then he'd put it back together, and he did a pretty good job. He fussed with them until he kind of learned where this went. Or else he paid attention as he took it apart, I don't know, but he wasn't very big when he started doing that. Taking everything apart and then putting it all back together. And he's a lot that way now.
He was adventurous. Tell about him lowering one of the kids out the window of the barn.
Well, that was Rowena. That was the one that was born in December. She was, let's see, he was about 4 or 5, and we were on this 2-acre place with the 2 big barns, and of course, so our little 2 acres, we raised some hay, and we'd always fill the barn with hay because we had a cow and we had chickens, and we just had quite a little place there and a nice garden and everything. But I went out to shake the rugs one day. I went out the back door to shake the rugs, and Roland was up in the hay up in the barn.
Second floor.
Huh?
They had a story up there.
There's a big window up there. But anyway, they had just filled the hay, the barn with hay, but he had a rope tied around Rowena's waist, and kind of up under her arms, and he had her hanging out the window. Kind of surprised him and surprised me when we saw him, and so we let go of the rope. Well, the thing was that there was a lot of hay on the ground below her, so she didn't get hurt. She just fell in this hay, and the hay just flew all over. But anyway, that was one of his things. He was always experimenting and finding something different to do.
Okay, the next one then would be Dorothy, right?
Yeah.
When was she born?
Dorothy was born in 1940.
In June, right?
June the 2nd, 1940. And
anything unusual? The war hadn't started?
No, I
remember we went off to somebody's house while she was born. I can't remember who took us.
Well, Dorothy, well, we always delivered, I always delivered at home, so they went down to Stewart's, I think is where you went down by the river there, you know, to Stewart's. And
that's where Roly and I had a bathtub we used as a raft. It was an old cast iron bathtub, and we'd put the plug in it and get in that thing, and the water was only about an inch or so from coming over. That was our raft, and we would.
Yeah, and I didn't know about all the times they went down there and
down the Sylvia's River. I don't know if he remembers that or not. We weren't very big.
I remember it, but I didn't remember it at the time. You'd come home, and then
we used to fish because Dad was a fisherman. We'd go down to the Sylvia's River and fish. I don't think we caught any good fish because I don't think there were any trout in it, but it was.
But anyway, they learned to fish.
So Dorothy was born in
Dorothy was born the 2nd day of June in 1940.
Now tell us about the war breaking out.
Well, the only thing that I remember about that was when did the war break out?
41. December the 7th, 1941.
And there was a lot of airplanes came in our area, and Daniel was really intrigued with the airplanes. He was going to fly one when he got to be a big boy, but it just seemed that we had a lot of servicemen there, and a lot of our local boys joined the services.
We had the P-38 Lightning, which was a twin boom tail airplane, and it was a fighter, and they would come and dive bomb our barn. Remember that?
Oh yeah, our barn was always a target for everything, you know. But the children really enjoyed it.
And they do a spiral as they. That's why I wanted to be a fighter pilot. Man, I saw those guys.
And you weren't very big. What was you about? You was.
I was 10 when we moved to Joe, so it was before that. So I was probably 8 or 9.
Well, anyway, he was always fascinated with those kind of things. Daniel was.
Okay, we got to Dorothy. Nothing happened spectacular in 1940.
No,
Who's next? Jim?
Most of the my deliveries were
pretty routine and fairly fast. Right?
Yeah, I delivered real fast.
Unlike my wife, who labors for 2 or 3 days.
And
yours was 2 or 3 hours. I presume.
Then Loisann came after Dorothy.
Anything unusual about her birth?
When Loisann was born, Grandma Davidson came up.
Was that the first time Grandma Davidson came? for a child?
No, she came after Lorna Jane was born, but she was the first time she came up there. Because I had people in the ward, you know, that helped.
Right.
But anyway, Loisann, Roland was to work, and Grandma had just arrived, and Roland had gone down and taken her, gotten her from the bus depot and brought her home. And then he had just gone back to work when I decided that I was going to have a baby. Because I just started fast.
Good timing. She came in that same day, right?
She came in the same day. She just hadn't even unpacked or anything. She just came. So, of course, we called the doctor's office, and the nurse came over. Evidently, I don't know, he came over, and then she was to call him. And so she came to the house, and of course I was in full sway. I was really going to have my baby, so she called him back, and we had a telephone, and so she called him, and just as he came in the door, Loisann was born. And as she was born, she was crying. She was just crying, and she had dimples, and you could just see those little dimples. Oh, she was really setting it up. And just as she was crying and was being born, her father walked in the back door, because we called him, and he came home from work. So she was quite a
noisy one.
Yeah, she really came into the world crying, and then Grandma stayed.
What year was that?
42.
So the war's in full swing, and
Yeah.
nobody had any gas and no tires, and had to ration everything. I remember stamping the cans flat so we could turn them back in.
And that was then. She was born, and then in 45 we had our third son, Jim. We named him James Gordon because my mother's name was Katherine Gordon, so he got the name Gordon for his name. Roland was named Roland Fillmore because my name, I was Lois Fillmore, so she got Fillmore. And of course, Daniel got the name of the two grandfathers, Daniel William. Daniel was Grandpa Davidson, and William was my father.
Why did Lorna get her name?
Well, he wanted to call her Lois, and I didn't want her called Lois, so we liked.
You didn't want two Loises in the same house.
Well, we finally got one, but not for a while.
Yeah.
And so we called her Lorna Jane, and Jane was after Grandma Davidson. Her name was Jane, and then, of course, Katherine was named after my
Your
mother.
sister, or your mother.
Her name was Katherine Gordon. But then when Loisann came, we named her Lois, and we added the Ann because we didn't want. So we always called her Loisann.
To this day, I call her that.
She says to this
her family
day.
calls her Lois.
She says, I know it's family when they call me Loisann, but everybody else, since she's grown up and in school and everything, she was just Lois, you know.
It's like around the house, I was always Daniel, whereas at school I was Dan or Gooch.
Yeah. Yeah, they.
So we got everybody's name. We got Lorna and Katherine and me and
Roland.
Roly after Dad, obviously, and Rowena after who?
She was just after a girlfriend I had when I was growing up as a girl. I had a real good friend, and her name was Rowena, and so we named her Jessie Rowena because Jessie was a family name for his folks, and I never did like the name Jessie, so
That was the second.
So we just called her Rowena, and
Dorothy was named after
Dorothy.
Wizard of Oz, or what?
We didn't have any name when Dorothy was born, and they needed to have a name because we had left the
Hospital.
no.
Oh, you weren't in the hospital, like you did.
And the doctor, they called one to know what we were going to name the baby. So Roland was out in the yard, and I said, "What are we going to name this baby?" And he says, "I don't care." We had decided kind of on Dorothy, other names, and I says, well, if it's up to me, then we're gonna call her Dorothy. So Dorothy, I just told them on the phone then that her name was Dorothy, and come to find out that somewhere back in the line, Roland had a girlfriend. My husband had a girlfriend that was named Dorothy, and so it didn't make that much difference, because she turned out to be a real nice child, just like the rest of the children were.
All the kids were pretty bright and pretty.
Oh yeah, they were all
obedient,
and they
cheerful,
were
50, brave.
they were all born well and healthy and well,
And are to this day.
yeah, we had a
No asthmas, allergies, and things as my side, or in Donna's side. Now we're down to Lois, and then after her Jim, and he was named after Uncle Jim, probably.
Well, I don't. We just named him James. We named him James Gordon.
Yeah, after your dad.
And well, there were so many Jameses on both sides of the family, and of course, when you have a child, you have the whole family wants to name him. So,
Oh yeah. You have to fight over
we
whose
had
name to
we
pick.
had quite a assortment of names that were suggested, and we decided to name him James Gordon.
After Jim was.
And then Jim was he was born in 45, and Margaret was born in 47, and we named her Margaret Louise. And
After
again,
what?
that was a family name. That Grandma Davidson's had a sister by the name of Margaret.
Oh yeah, I remember.
My Aunt Maggie, you know.
I remember.
But
And, she was
I
98 years old when I met her, and she was.
Well, yeah,
Walking up
because
the trail, I couldn't
she
keep
was
up with her.
102 when she finally died. That's when we went back to Scotland, when she had her 100th birthday. But
When was Elaine born?
Margaret, Elaine was born after Loisann, between Loisann and Jim.
Why'd you name her Elaine?
I really don't know that there was anybody that she was particularly named after, but Elaine was born in 43, on the 10th of October in 43. We just named her Elaine. And then Jim was born in 45.
How old was Jim when Elaine died? Just a couple years ago.
Well, Elaine died in 48.
And what'd she die of?
Telescope valve. That was her large intestines telescoped into the small ones.
They don't know what causes that.
They said it doesn't happen to girls, it's usually young little boys. And that
They thought it was appendicitis or something, right?
Well, we kind of thought it was, but he said when he took her to the doctor, he said he hoped it was appendix, but he was afraid it was bowel. And
they wouldn't die of something like that now, because it's a fairly
no.
simple operation, but what
she
killed her?
died. She died in 48. Well,
They operated for a long time, right?
Well, we took her into, well, let's see. She was born in 43, and then Jim was born in 45, and Margaret was born in 37. 47. And then I was expecting Mollie, and it was, she took sick. Roland had taken me up to the doctor because I was time to go to see my doctor. And
Now, this was in a hospital, right?
yeah, I went up to the hospital where the doctor was, and I was fine. He examined me, and I was fine, and so I walked home. Told Roland I'd walk home.
That's a pretty fair walk.
Because he needed to get to work. He was he's selling insurance, and he needed to get to work. And so as I was walking home, I got about a block or two from home, and I met Daniel. He was coming, and Daniel was always so neat and everything, and that day he looked kind of rumpled and hadn't really combed his hair or anything. And I said, well, Daniel, where are you going? And he said, I'm coming to find you. He said, Elaine is sick. He said, she's crying and crying. And as we walked on...
She was my favorite, because I was about, what, 12,
Yeah.
14?
And as we neared the place, why, we could hear her crying. So the doctor, we called the doctor, and I think it was Dora Johnson, but anyway, one of my friends, we took her up to the hospital. Roland and I took her up to the hospital, and because he came home for lunch, and while I was talking to the doctor, and so we took her up to the hospital, and he examined her, and he said he hoped it was appendix, but he was afraid it was bowel.
What day of the week was that, do you remember? She died the same day she got sick, right?
Well, she died the next morning. They did surgery. They took her right into surgery. And
She was in surgery for...
well, she's in surgery for about 4 hours. And when Dr. Smith, who was the surgeon, came out of surgery, he never looked right or left. He never said a word. He just walked straight out of there. And Dr. Weir came out. He was the doctor that assisted, and
Whatever happened to Holman?
he came out, and he said that he was telling about it, and he took us down and showed us where they had telescoped the large intestine and telescoped into the small one by about 10 inches. And they were just as black, and peritonitis had already set in. And he said if she made it, he said she would have a long, hard pull. Well, it was about about after 5 o'clock, and they decided that she better have a special nurse. So we had a registered nurse come in to be with her, and when she came in, the doctor came, and he said, Lois, you better go home. He said, you've been here all day. He said, you better go home. And so again, my friend came and took me home, because she didn't live very far from the hospital. She took me back home, and Roland said he'd stay with her. So he did, and I went home, and it was about, it was getting kind of late, and Roland called me, and he told me that they had her, that she kind of turned for the worse, and so I called my friend, and she took me up to the hospital again, and as I went in, they was hooking Elaine up to oxygen, and then I stayed until about midnight, and the doctor came in. Dr. Weir had never left the hospital all day, and he came in, and he said that I better go home. So my friend Pearl Miller took me home, and I sat down on the Davenport, and she says, call me if you need me. And so I sat down on the Davenport. It was getting near to midnight. The children were all to bed and everything, and about 2 o'clock the phone rang, and when it rang, I knew what it was, because I just felt like my heart was beating all over me. And he just said, she's gone. So I called my friend Pearl again. She was my first counselor in the Relief Society. and she came in and we went up to the hospital, and I told them, Elaine was just laying there in her bed, and I told them not to cover her face up, she was just covered up like she was sleeping. And so we left then, and Roland and I left then, and on the way home, we passed the mortician. He was going up. And so we didn't say anything till the next morning when the children got up. Then we told them that she didn't make it. But when we took her in for surgery, she said, they asked me to take her to the bathroom, and she said, Mama, what are they going to do? And I said, they're going to make you well. So she climbed back. She climbed back up on the bed and lay down, and they did the surgery then. But the doctor said, had she lived, she would have always had trouble with her bowels, and when she became a young lady, she would have had problems. So I just figured in his wisdom, he took her home. And she died on the, in the meantime, before she ever got sick or anything, Loisann and the children, was on their father's birthday on the 30th of March. They came home from school, and they wanted to go over to the park, which was a little play park with swings, and we called it the Big John.
Yeah, I forget what they call it.
Well, anyway, there was the children would hang on to it, and they had to swing them, and they had, and they were over there. Lorna's the oldest girl. She said, I'll go over, and we won't be very long. And I said, well, don't be very long, because your dad will be home for supper. And they weren't gone any time at all until they came back and
Broke her leg.
yeah, but who was Everdeen, and who? Stuart? It wasn't Stuart.
Tucker.
Anyway, one of the gentlemen from the ward had come by, and he carried her home, and we called the doctor, and Dr. Weir came down again and to the home, and he said she had broken her leg.
Upper thigh.
And she had broken her leg 1.5 inches from the hip joint, and so we had to. He said he'd go back to the hospital for us to bring her up. By the time we got her up to the hospital, he had everything set up, and they put her in traction, and she had 25-pound rock that she just practically stood on her head.
She was in there a long time.
Well, she's in there 9 weeks, and they had to stretch the bones. So,
now this was after Elaine's death, or before, or during, or what?
No,
Close to it?
It was, Loisann broke her leg on the 30th of March, and Elaine, we brought Loisann home from the hospital on the 15th of May in a cast from her ribs clear to her toes because of the way her leg was broken, but she was in the hospital that long. And then they had to do the surgery. Then on the 17th they did the surgery on Elaine, and she died on the 18th, and Loisann was 6 on the 19th.
A lot of troubles all at one time.
And one of the gentlemen that used to come and visit us, he said that the Heavenly Father was real good to the Mormons, because he gave them all their troubles at once, and they didn't have to worry about them one at a time. And we really did. But anyway, then Elaine was buried. We buried her on the 21st of May. And of course, most of the relatives came to the services, and florist said they had to order 7 times. They ordered flowers for her grave, for her funeral, because said it was one of the biggest funerals that had, especially for a child. And
I remember
and
we
then
put
of course
dandelions on her
she
grave
was
'cause that was her favorite flower.
dandelions. Yeah, she was one that always brought me in. First thing away, I had a bouquet of dandelions when they first started blooming. But she died in May, and Loisann was able to have her cast off in August.
We lived in the lemon house by this time.
Yeah, we had purchased and lived, and we bought the lemon house when just before Margaret was born. We moved from Fuller Home and bought the lemon house.
Then Mollie was born.
And Mollie was born on the 21st day of September, and
What year?
48. And she was okay. Mollie was fine, but it was just that we had such a time.
Was that the same year now? Well, all this other stuff?
Yeah, Elaine died in the 18th of May of 48, and she was born the 21st of September.
And the leg was broken
in March.
March of this same year.
All the same year.
Seems like we lost a cow about that same time.
Oh, we
Whole
did.
bunch of stuff.
Yeah, we had one of our cows bloated, and we had, just everything.
Just life went on, yeah.
As it seems, sometimes things kind of pile up on you, but maybe it was just as well.
Why'd you name Mollie Mollie?
I don't know. I don't really think there was, but we didn't spell it the M-O-L-L-Y. We spelled it M-O-L-L-I-E, Mollie. And
Did she have a middle name?
no.
And after Mollie, Mollie was next to last, right?
Yeah, and then Mollie was things went all along pretty good. But anyway, when it came time for him to take the cast off of Lois's leg, we took her up to the hospital, and there was a doctor there from Portland, and he had been examining her and everything. It was quite a thing, and so when we got up there, he just took a little cast saw, and he just cut the cast in half and just laid it off, and of course her leg was stiff as a board, and he stood her up on both feet and took hold of her hand and walked her across the floor. And somebody mentioned about crutches, and he said, no, she won't need crutches, he said, but he said we had to bend her leg several times a day. We'd have to give her a warm bath.
Because that knee wasn't used to bending for a couple of months.
It'd been 9 weeks that she hadn't, she'd been in a cast 9 weeks, and so we had to give her a warm bath, or kind of a hot, warm bath, and then we would have to rub it good with olive oil, and then we had to bend it. We had to bend it not till she just cried, but till she really was crying. And so we had missionaries that was living in a little apartment we had in our house, and so the missionaries come home, and they would make her bend her knee for us until it didn't take long then. So, and she's had no problem at all with her leg. She's never had any problems from the time they set it. And
so they did a good job.
Till
One
now.
of the things that happened in Burns
and
was good.
it was, I asked her just the other day, I said, "You ever had any trouble with your leg?" And she said, "No, never had a bit of trouble with it. No arthritis, no nothing." And so that was the one nice thing. But then we went then until 1953. Janice was born. That was our number 12.
So that was also in Burns.
That was also in
Moved here a
Burns.
year later.
And
So all those kids from me down,
were born in Burns.
they're all born in Burns, but they remember this home more than Burns.
Well, most of them. Mollie Mollie was 6 when we moved here, and of course she started school, and of course Margaret was a 2nd grader, and Jim was a 4th, and they went right on up to Roland, because Daniel was
I graduated high school in Burns.
Daniel was at University of Utah on the college, and Katherine and Lorna Jane were at Rick's. They were in college when we moved here, and so Roland was a junior in high school when we moved here. And Janice was, she was a year in January, and we moved here in June. So she was just about a year and a half old when we moved here. And so the younger ones don't remember a lot of Burns at all. But
Burns was a good place for us.
it was a good place to raise a family because it was in the mission field, and they had a real good school systems, and it was just a real nice little community to live in because everybody was friendly and kind, and of course everybody knew everybody, and we were still living in the Lemon home when we moved over here. Then we sold that and moved over here, and
You had a cast iron stove, a Monarch range,
big
that you wanted to bring with you. It'd be sitting right here instead of that.
no,
thing.
the Monarch range, but it was here.
Oh,
It was that little stove that had the 5-gallon water tank,
Oh,
reservoir on it too.
oh,
And but when Dad and Jim Brandon moved us over here, they didn't bring the stove.
that's
home.
kidding. What happened to the Monarch range that was
It's
here?
out in the garage.
Still here.
Still out in the garage. I don't know whether they ever use those ever again or not.
Oh, wood
Never-
stove.
Old wood stove, wood or coal burning stove.
Amazing.
But when we moved over here, then we had an electric stove.
What did you think about moving into this mansion?
Well, it was nice because there was a place for everything.
And by that time you had a house full of kids and you needed some
Well,
space.
and we had enough bedrooms that the boys took the 2 rooms. You boys went up to the 3rd. We call it the third
Third
floor.
floor.
There's 2 rooms and then a big attic, and the attic was everything was all floored, and the rooms up there were papered. You know, they were, and so the boys took the 2 rooms upstairs without even seeing what the house looked like. Oh, and
Higher we
then
can go, the better, you know.
and then we had 4 bedrooms and a bath on the 2nd floor, and we had 1 bathroom and 1 bedroom down here on the main floor.
This was a study at first, right? Is that what Dad used it for?
No, Dad always used that room he always used that room. We never had that room for a bedroom up there, never.
Oh, that was always his study, the
That
one that's
was
there now?
always Dad's office up there. That's why we had they had the little room down here. But we, by that time, see, 3 of them was away to college. And then Lorna and Katherine, Daniel went on his mission in 55.
55.
And the 2 girls got married in June and August of 56.
So how many went on missions? I was the first, right?
We had, all 3 of the boys and 2 of the girls went on missions.
So I went to New Zealand.
Roland went to Canada.
Jim
went to Scotland. And Rowena went to somewhere, where'd she down in the southern states? She went to,
Seems like she was in the Midwest somewhere.
and then there was Margaret.
Margaret went to Texas or something.
I'd have to look it up in their records so that I don't remember.
I'm sure they'll correct it because they'll all have a chance to.
But anyway,
Put something on this.
We've lived here in this house ever since. The children all graduated from high school, and most of them went to college. If they didn't go to college, they went to trade school of some kind.
Well, that's neat. Well,
And they come home as frequently as they can, at least once or twice a year.
when we come, we always like to putter or dig in the yard or do something useful.
And,
But Dad was like that when he'd come visit us. He was always puttering and
well,
helping
you,
and
you have to
fixing.
kind of keep busy when you go somewhere else.
I have on that tape.
We're going to the temple at noon
Yeah.
and
We'll take this with us. We'll shoot the temple outside. Of course, we don't do anything inside.
but
And,
anyway, I'd better go over to the post office and buy some stamps and mail a letter.